my talent to create opportunities for other people's talent to shine, and then that would create pathways for them to go to college. And so I am going to give a little plug to ABH and say that 100% of our kids graduated high school and went to college. And these were kids at the Boston Public Schools where the graduation rate was 68%. A lot of them were first generation college students. So it was something I was really proud of. Why would I leave? Because I live in Situate and have for the last 19 years of my husband. I'm going to call him out. He should be used to it by now. He's been with me for 24 years. But we moved to Situate, and we have sons who are now 20 and 15. But they 6 years ago they were younger, and I was realizing that there really isn't a ton of art opportunities in the South Shore. It's public schools. It's more sports focused. It really is. And I was making opportunities for young people in the arts in Boston, but I wasn't doing it in the South Shore for my kids. And I wanted my kids to say, this is important here. So when this position became available, I was like, I'm going to go for that. And that's what led me here. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
I love that. And that's another way that our stories sort of align, in the fact that, as a Quincy native, I was thinking the same. There's all of these arts opportunities if you go into the city.
Yes.
But you come 20 minutes out of the city, and let's be real, how many of our parents are driving their kids into Boston once a week for an activity? Absolutely not. You're all like, nope, not doing it. And so it's really beautiful what you're bringing here and what you're bringing to our community. So as a nonprofit leader, these past few years have been quite the roller coaster. What are some great things that have come for the Arts Center, and what are some of the biggest challenges that have come from the wonderful past couple of years that we've had?
Honestly, the challenges are part of the great things. Because the challenge is how we learn to innovate and how we took risks that maybe we wouldn't have taken. So we closed down for 4 months. We could have just shut down, but we're like, nope. So Tony Pila, who's on my staff, is here today. He's our education director. He'd sort of been a little averse to online programming. We would butt heads a little bit, and we said, Tony, we got to do it, or there's no programming. So we figured it out, and most of our programming has returned to in-person. In fact, there's a class next door. Jack Harron is teaching watercolor right now, which is a great use. We have a very multi-use space, which I love. But we do have a couple of classes that remain online, and I don't think that would have happened had we not been pushed. Another area, though, I remember at one point, I use this quote a lot because at the time it really stung. One of our volunteers said, it's really hard to be on the journey with you, Patrice, when the roadmap keeps changing. And I said, I was like, ouch, that hurts. But then I thought, what, she's right. It is difficult to be on the journey, but she should be looking at the way that we are navigating those roadblocks. There are roadblocks, and we're figuring it out. And it also really kicked us in the butt. We were a very paper-heavy organization. 68 years, and some of our systems and infrastructure were 68 years old. Our database was a 1990 era, Access database. Our website, please, I do not encourage anybody to look at it for another month or two till the new one goes up because it's terrible. But it encouraged us to go for that discretionary funding and invest in that because we knew that we didn't know how long the closures were going to happen, and we needed to be able to communicate with people. So I think if I would just do one more call out, we have a new, that vestibule used to just be empty space, and Liz Townsend was also on my staff, and she's in the white in the back. It was her idea to change that space into something that we call the Gallery Artist Spotlight. We have a membership series, and every month, she takes total ownership of this. She reaches out to the artists, and so now people, when they're walking by, it's not just this unutilized space. They know we're an art center when you walk by. So before I go any further, there's a theme here. I keep calling out my staff, and there's a reason. They're not my staff. They're the art center staff, but I consider them part of the collective, and they are. So I've already mentioned Tony and Liz, but I didn't mention Sharon and Cecilia, who are both here. And they are really what makes this organization tick.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of leadership, is being able to point and say, here's where you shine. That's a great idea. Let's roll with it, even if it's not your own. And I think that's a mark of a great leader. So it's great to see that. So let's do a little bit of connection here, because unless you're in the arts world, you might be thinking, thinking, how does the South Shore Arts Center, or how does art help me in my business?
Mm-hmm.
How does that connect? So can you talk to us a little bit about the role of art in the workplace, from graphic design and technology to self-care, mental health, all of that?
Well, and it actually ties into why I'm on the Economic Development Council rather than the Chamber of Commerce. So Peter Foreman met with me virtually because of the pandemic about 3 years ago, and he said, we'd really love, your name's been come up a few times, we'd really love to, we were thinking about the Chamber of Commerce, but, we have this other opportunity. I said, I'm with the Economic Development Council because I really want to show the role that art plays in the economy and that the creative economy is the fastest growing sector. It really is. So like if you think about what are the new businesses, it's website design, it's graphic design, it's apps, all of that comes from creative people. And those skills are learned, you may not think of it, learned in a painting class, but it's incremental. So you start with painting or you start with drawing and then you get excited by the technology aspect of it. So for that aspect, I think I've already lost your question because that's how I think.
No, you're totally fine. And I'm thinking too, even just hearing you talk about that, I'm thinking about just developing the art of creativity.
Yes.
Just having, a blank piece of paper in front of you and telling someone go.
Yes. It's the creative process. And the creative process teaches, so to go back to your first question, or second question, one of those questions, with the challenge and how you come out of the challenge, it's the creative process. Like if you're a creative thinker and you're always, finding solutions, this kind of practice and discipline prepares you for that. And and I think that is at the underpinning of innovation in the growing economy.
Absolutely.
But then in terms of the self-care, which I did not respond to, I think artists, I always say that artists are documenting either their personal history or the global history. Mm-hmm. So during the pandemic, we still had our exhibits, and we had one that we titled Pivot, because that was the word that you heard all the time. Right? You have to pivot, we're all bloody sick of that stupid word. But I was like, all right, I'm gonna own it, we're gonna have an exhibit, we're gonna call it Pivot. And people couldn't come in groups. We had to have self-guided tours. They would sign up on Sign Up Genius, which I always call Sign Up Jesus because I can't get it right. So they would come through and they would, I'd be like, oh, you're late, you got 5 minutes. Take your brisk little tour through here. But it really was something where people said, oh, thank you so much. I really needed that dose of art. I really needed a place. So Lisa Martyr is one of our artists, and she's part of our faculty. She was one of the artists who pivoted to online teaching and really made the organization come alive. And her students had said to me, oh, Lisa's such a treasure. I know that. but they thanked me for having classes, or they thanked me, and I was like, that's not me that you're thanking. It's a community. We're all in this together, but I'll take the thanks.
So from your history, from your background,
yes.
You are someone who cares very much about DEI practices
yes.
and accessibility, especially when it comes to the arts. I know from my personal work and what I do, arts can often be something that's considered for people who are, at a certain level, or who are in a certain socioeconomic class or whatnot. How do you see your South Shore Arts Center going out and doing this DEI work? And then how can that... I was riffing and then I got lost. Hold, please. How can we as a region work to create more opportunities or think differently about who is included in leadership roles throughout our companies and our communities?
Very good question.
Thanks.
Very well stated.
It was very well written.
Very well stated. No, honestly, I think the first thing that I did, I've been here 6 years, and the first thing that I did, in fact, it's in that little packet, there's a little membership like a brochure. It's a tiny little thing, and it folds out, and it's I am South Shore. I am South Shore Arts Center, sorry, I am. It's a series of affirmations, I am. Because what I wanted to do was break down the barriers of who was here and who felt invited in. And the reason was, as I mentioned, I've lived in Scituate for 19 years. Before I came here, I never came here. I never, even though I'm the demographic, I was working at an arts agency, And it was, I remember in the interview, we talked about that, and I said, what's your involvement? I said, I'm not. Why do you want to be part of this? I said, I'm intrigued by the organization. I think it has so much potential to really include the whole South Shore, but I never felt invited in, and I want to invite the world in, at least the region. I want everybody to know that there is a place for them. It doesn't matter what their age is, it doesn't matter what their income is, it doesn't matter what their abilities are, either artistic abilities or just when we talk about normative abilities, right? Physical or whatever. So, and funnily enough, in one of what I always refer to as my sabbatical, I don't know if there's anyone from the Arts of the South Shore here today, but I had 9 months. During my 16 years at AFH, I did 9 months at the Arts of the South Shore. I left for a little bit. I needed to go back to work full time, and I was finding the Boston commute too much. So I went there, and while I was there, I loved it, and I loved working for Daryl Cook-Ivan. But I missed the art experience. I need to be in the arts. So I created an exchange program for the individuals with disabilities, developmental disabilities that are at the Arts of the South Shore with here. And then my first day on the job here, didn't they walk in, that program was still going. It had been probably 5 years at that point. And I was just like, oh, I'm in the right place, because this is a perfect circle. And so that was like, I was doing that work here before I even came here. But since I've been more intentional. You welcome people in, but what does that mean? So you look at all the different people who feel like there's barriers. You have to make sure that they can afford to come here. You have to make sure that it is spatially accepting. So Allie and I were just talking earlier today, and she's from Columbia, and I said, oh, you have to come out and see this mural that was done. We had a street art exhibit 5 years ago with Colombian street artists and Boston street artists. And I said, see, part of your history and culture is represented here. This is like, there is a place for you. But maybe that wouldn't have been something as engaging when you first came through, right? But there's only so much we can do here. We're not physically in an easy to get to place. I don't know if any of you found it difficult time. Parking, driving, it's all not great, right? But, so we started bringing our model to the schools outside. I wanted to reach other towns where there might be, again, a physical impediment to getting art access. There's no art in the Randolph schools. So we work with South Shore Stars, and they subcontract with us to do all of the visual arts programming. So we're at Randolph, 2 sites in Quincy and in Weymouth, and that allows us to bring access to the arts, but it also allows us to really have a whole different group of people. The coastal communities where we're located tend to be more resourced, tend to be very white, and it's nice to bring people from all cultures and unite them here, and then they say, oh, maybe I could come here, and feel welcome. So that's sort of been that, and then we've had more intentional here. We did a Black Lives and White Fragility jury show it's coming on 2 years now, and last year we had Rob Gibbs, who's the visual artist in residence at the MFA. He goes by the tag Pro-Black, and he has done the Breathe Life series that's in Roxbury, so it includes he also did the Roxbury Love Story, which is MLK and his Coretta Scott King, like talking on the telephone. So I really wanted, to bring that to Cohasset, but just for that exposure, but just to also celebrate so people know that art isn't just the people that are here, it's the artists who are all around us.
Yeah, and one word that you used a lot that I think of a lot, and I think people who are doing ADEI work think about a lot, is intentionality. It's I find, and disagree with me, but I don't think you will. I think sometimes we think, oh, we'll say it's inclusive on our brochure, right, and that will do the trick. We've done the stamp, and boom, there we go. We are now inclusive. But it's actually so much more than that. It's having those intentional thoughts of who aren't we reaching, why aren't we reaching them, and what do we need to do to get them here? And making sure that those doors are sort of busted wide open, especially in areas that could use a little bit of that ADEI feel. You know what I mean?
And I think calling attention to it is important as well. Like, it's not being afraid to have the conversation. So I know that I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, but it's okay, because that's how I have the conversation. Darlene and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we were just talking last week, and she was at the Women in Local Leadership series featuring Abby Correa, who is Latin American, and she's like, how does it feel like as you're breaking new barriers as a woman of color in this leadership role? And it makes people uncomfortable to call that out, but it's important to call it out because it's an achievement. It's how the world is changing, and if we don't acknowledge that the world is changing and that we're being part of the change, then we're not really doing the DEI work. And to the latter part of your question, what Darlene did, that's how we made that change in like a chamber of commerce or in a situation like this. I think that's really, really important.
I could talk about that all day, but I just want to keep going because I can do it all day. I love it. But you know, I went to a conference a while back, and somebody said something to me that was really interesting, and I'll share it just before I shoot to the next question. I was in an ADEI deep dive workshop, and they were talking about students, and it was a children's choir conference. Yes, those actually exist, and yes, they're very nerdy. But we were all sitting around talking about how to get more kids singing in the world, and he was saying, you know, it's not enough to show the kids the program and then say, okay, now come in this office and we'll talk about, you know, whether or not you can afford it. But rather to flip that model and to say, you can afford it, come look at the program. And I think that was something that really flipped a switch in my head. It's not, here's the product, okay, now let's talk about the scary stuff underneath it. It's let's talk about the scary stuff and let's get that out of the way because then here's the program.
Yes, exactly.
And that's just been something that I think that's the intentionality flip. For me in my organization.
It's being honest, having the conversation. Don't pretend that it's under the rug.
Right.
Get it out from under the rug. Get your vacuum out.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and you know, that's a really important thing. And I love seeing that you're doing that with visual art. Okay. Question number 6. I'm not getting lost this time. No more riffing. Women are often told that they can have it all, and that there has been a lot of pushback on that lately. How did you determine your personal and professional priorities as you've navigated through your career journey? Do you separate the two?
I totally separate the two, although my husband will disagree sometimes. We're on the phone again. But, you know, it is, having it all is a misbegotten ideal. It will never happen. We can't have it all because when you're in the office, you're thinking about your children or your family or your fur children. You're like your thoughts are at the home life, and when you're home, like particularly in an entrepreneurial position like yours, or like when we're, you know, like many of us are in entrepreneurial roles. This doesn't feel like one maybe to you, but it is. Trust me, because we're so super scrappy. I'm always thinking about the art center, and like I always say that I get my aha moments in the shower, because like that's my quiet time. So I'm in the shower, I'm like, oh, I know what to do, and I come out as quickly as I can and I write it down, and then I share it with my staff, and they're like, oh, in the shower again? I'm like, yes.
Okay, but something to change your world. Shower crayons.
Oh my God.
Anyway, my secrets are shared.
Oh, awesome! I love it. But I think that is there is no having it all. But you just have to find a balance, and finding that balance is really important. And when it comes to the weekend, I really do try to shut off. I mean, I'm not going to say I don't check my email, because I do, but I really try not to respond. I try to have that distance. Can't always have that. And when I'm here, I'm like, I was in a Zoom meeting the other day, and my younger son called, and I didn't pick up because I'm in a Zoom meeting, right? And I sent a little text. I was like, I'm in a Zoom meeting. And then my husband called. So I'm like, oh my God, it must be an emergency. So I said to everybody in the Zoom, I'm really sorry. Like, I have to get off the call right now. It turns out my son needed to have his Mario costume brought to a friend that evening. And just, but I'm thinking like, oh my God, like he's like in some kind of dire danger. So I will put my family first. I will leave a Zoom meeting for them, even if it's for a Mario costume.
There we go. And that kind of leads into the next question, and I think this is a great question. I love this question. How would you define success? And you can define it professionally and personally, but how do you reach that benchmark?
I think success is so subjective. It's really, well, which is why I said, how do you define it, right? Obviously, but it is, for me, it's knowing that, well, personally, it's knowing that that I've done my job as a parent, that I'm raising kids who are independent, that they love me. That's a big success for me. I've done something right, as long as my 15-year-old still kisses me on the head, you know, my 20-year-old still sends me, you know, like, Mom, I'm working on this paper, can you look at it? That's a success story for me as a mom, you know. Here, I feel like it's a success. I feel like, actually, that the Art Center is becoming more cohesive, and that if the staff feels good about it, that's a success for me. And if people come in and there's like, I'm seeing people saying, oh, just like what we talked about, oh my God, that was the best class. I'm so glad you have that instructor, or what a workshop, or that event, oh my God, I can't believe the art, it literally changed my world. That's a success for me. I don't have high aspirations. I'm honestly just looking to be happy. That sounds so hokey, but it's true. I'm really kind of an optimistic, happy person. And I don't like when I'm not. I don't like being off kilter. So that's success for me, honestly.
I love that. And I don't think happiness is not a high aspiration.
That's a good point.
I think that's great, and I know I feel similarly. There's something about, you know, joy.
There's something, yes.
There's something about joy.
Having joy and giving joy. And I find so much joy when I know that people have experienced that here. That they've come in here and that this is their happy place. That feels good.
Mm-hmm. It's just 3 letters, but it's a really important word.
It is.
So going in a little bit of a different direction, sometimes there are things in our lives that are really big transitions that kind of shift one way or another. Can you tell us about a big transition in your life, and what are a couple of takeaways from that time that shaped who you are, what you've become now?
Yeah, sure. So probably about 12 years ago, I needed to go back into the workforce full time for a little bit. There was shifts in my husband's job, and it was just like, you know, we had 2 kids, and I was super stressed about it at the time. I never left the workforce. It was important for me to be part of it, but I wasn't. My youngest was 3, and I wasn't quite ready to go back full time. And I always say, because my poor husband right now is like, oh, honey, why did you say that? But honestly, it's like the best thing that happened to us, because going back to work full time actually gave me confidence. So I left the position that I was at. I did my sabbatical, and while I was in my sabbatical at the ARC, I discovered that you know, like sometimes when you leave a position and you start something new, people recognize things in you that other people have taken for granted for a long time. And I was suddenly feeling like, oh, this is really, I can do this. I actually am making a difference, where I hadn't been feeling that way in a long time. I just maybe wasn't so in the thick of being a mom and, you know, doing work and getting the kid picked up from daycare and like figuring it all out. I actually had a chance to focus on that. And if I hadn't had to make that transition, which at the time was hard, I never would have gotten here. And this is where I need to be. Even as I said, like, while I was at the ARC, I created the program that now exists, that partnership. So I treasure that. It was a tough time in our life, but it was a beautiful outcome. And I became like, so at that time, 10, 12 years ago, if I were sitting here, I'd be shaking. I wouldn't be able to do it. I remember my husband and I we were just doing like a little local CPC funding request on behalf of some sidewalks, and I almost started crying because I was so nervous. I didn't have confidence in myself, and it allowed me to build that. And I think that's kind of, it's allowed me to trust myself, and to know that on a personal level, we can get through anything. You know, that's
So what do you think, so obviously we're here at the Women in Local Leadership, so that's something different, right? What do you think are the biggest roadblocks for women who are coming into leadership roles today?
You know, there's still that glass ceiling. There's still a barrier. It's different, and I think our reproductive lives do play a part, because if you're a woman in her 20s, 30s, and you're thinking about having a family, that's going to hold you back from some of the promotions that your male counterpart isn't going to have. Because even though he'll still get his paternal leave, because that's new, and I love that, and that they should, but they're not the one where their body goes through those changes. They're not the one. There's all those things that you don't know about till you go through it. And I do think that that's part of it. But I also at the same time feel like there is a much greater gateway for young women in the workforce. I see more women, I see more leaders who are women, and I love that. Like when I entered the workforce, that wasn't the case. You know, the women would have to, and you know, you could dress a little more casually. Which we used to have to wear pantyhose, and you know, like I remember I had an earring up here I had to take out, like little things like that. And that was in the creative field. So I think, I don't know if I can answer your question like really well, but the landscape has changed. I think there's more opportunities, but I think there's always going to be that push-pull. And I don't want to get political, but particularly as reproductive rights are being taken away, that's also something that is going to impact women's leadership. It just is.
And then our final question, it looks like, before we
We'll
bop
open it
into
up.
Q&A, is what are some characteristics of good leadership? So when you're thinking about leadership, what are those things?
So I think I like to look at people who I admire for that, because it's hard to look at myself and not feel like I'm being vain if I'm but the things that I connect to and that I hope that I emulate, obviously my parents were really big, you know, they were the ones that I modeled myself after most, and they both ran small businesses. My dad was the head of an accounting firm, and he was really involved in the community. But he also, the way that he treated everybody was just so equitable. Like I remember going to a restaurant, and he was never patronizing or he just always made sure that he treated the wait staff as his equals. And he said, these are people who are having an honest job. He really respected people who worked hard. And I always thought, you know, I have to make sure that I always recognize that every job is an honest job, and you don't ever think that you're above someone. And my mother ran this, I mean, she could sell to anybody. So at the time she was working for Ola Mills, which doesn't even exist anymore, but I don't know if you guys remember it. It was a photography studio, and she'd sell these photo packets. You'd get like 3 photos for $8.95 or something like that. And she could sell to like somebody who owned a photo studio. Like she would say to you, Dave, like, you need this. And you'd say, I need this. My mother, like, she just has such a personality. She's so ebullient. And so I always sort of wanted, my dad's too reserved for my liking. I always wanted to have my mom's sort of like spirit, but my dad's sense of everything is just, like that social justice was drilled into me. And then I had 2 phenomenal mentors. And one of them was Susan Rogerson at Artists for Humanity, because she had such a vision. Like she could see, when they talk about the forest through the trees, she could see to the next continent through the trees. She just, and you would say, I don't know if that's gonna work. And she wouldn't take no for an answer, and God love her, she could make it happen. She really did, against all odds. She could really make it happen. Sometimes other things were lost in the translation, but her vision was phenomenal. And then I had Daryl Cook-Ivan at the Arc, who I always consider my best boss. She was accessible, she listened, she was there. So those are the hallmarks for me of good leadership. You have to have vision, but you have to be present. You have to, you know, be there for your staff. You have to welcome their ideas, and as we talked about earlier, you have to, you know, acknowledge them, because if you're a leader, you're not on your own. You're leading, which means that there's other people who are the reason that everything happens, and they're leading too. You have to acknowledge their leadership, and so for me, that would be good leadership.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read the book Wolfpack by Abby Wambach, but Abby's a great soccer player. I know nothing about soccer, but she she did all the Olympics and all the cups and things that you do, right? I don't know anything about soccer, but the book is really good, and I highly recommend it. But she has this whole chapter about pointing to the person. So every single time she got a goal, and she has more goals scored than any woman or man in soccer basically ever, from my understanding. And every single time she got a goal, she would point to the person who gave the assist. And that's just what that reminds me of, and that's what I see you doing with your staff, and I think that's really beautiful. So, thank you. I think now let's open it up. Does anybody have any questions for Patrice?
I have a question. Can I chime in here
Yes.
for a minute? Patrice, can you talk a little bit more about the connection between the creative economy and kind of how you see its role in making the South Shore more attractive for future generations?
Yes. So I've been interested in placemaking for a long time, which is the planning and design of a place so that it draws visitors, stimulates business, and my specific focus is in creative placemaking, with the idea that, sort of to borrow that phrase from the baseball movie that I can't remember, Field of Dream maybe, if you build it, they will come. Because when statistics have proven people want to live where it's a fun place to go. There's music outside, where there's art, where the architecture's cool, where you can just sort of walk down Main Street and wow, like look at these shops that are there. So creative industries really are a huge part of a successful placemaking initiative. And when about 8 years ago now, Mass Cultural Council, which is a huge funder of the arts for our state, they have an initiative called the Cultural District Initiative, and it's really rooted in those placemaking ideals. So I was part of the group that applied for and secured district initiative status, I guess, designation from that for Situate Harbor, because we have an art walk every year, and because we have this funky little music store, and like anybody knows Situate Harbor knows, like it's kind of like it's a funky place. It's getting a little gentrified now, but it's a really cool place to walk. There's a jewelry store that I get all my jewelry from. It's called Native, and it's just a really fun place. And that was another part of my journey and my confidence building, because I sort of helped build recognition around these ideas, and watched. I physically watched the manifestation and the transformation really of Situate from this, people kind of didn't really know what to do with it, and then they it became, I'm sort of meandering in my head, I'm not sure how, but it became more entrenched and branded as this place where a destination. And then on the Economic Development Council, I've had many conversations with Peter Foreman, and then we talked about cultural placemaking. So there's been, and I got to be part of the Hello South Shore initiative, which Heather and Courtney, if you guys haven't seen it yet, they deserve huge kudos because they did a great job on it. And it's a fantastic, the whole idea, like the name Hello South Shore, and there's a little thought bubble, and it's just really cute. But they created these destinations for all these towns in the South Shore when people were stuck inside during COVID, and you could come, and there was like, we had a day here, you'd see the murals at the Art Center and in Cohasset, and how that makes a community attractive. Why you want to live there, why you want to play there, why you want to work there. And that's really at the basis of it. So that's sort of my sidekick. That's my unpaid job. Yep. One of my unpaid jobs. Yes.
Julie, can you also talk about the nonprofit, your other side job with the heritage?
Oh gosh, yeah. So highly marketable master's in Irish studies doesn't prepare you for much, but
I have a minor.
Oh, very good. From BC?
No. Actually, University College Dublin. So.
Oh, okay. So did you go to UCD for?
Yeah.
Oh,
or studied abroad, so I didn't realize in that kind of connection.
I was UCG.
Oh, okay.
But doesn't prepare you for a lot. But it does prepare you to be on when they build a sister city for your town in
Yep.
West Cork. So I'm on the sister city for that. And one of the things we talked about in that was how in Ireland they have something called the Atlantic Way. And again, placemaking. But it does the whole, and I just took my family to Ireland over in March, and we would see the little symbol. They have a logo. And it's just right on the road. And it's the whole, it extends all the way from Galway, where I'm from, all the way down past Cork and Kerry. It's really cool. And so we said, let's do that for the South Shore, because this is the Irish Riviera. That's what it's called. It's the most Irish part of Ireland outside of Ireland. And so we created the South Shore Irish Heritage Trail, and that's now maybe 2 years in development, and it's beginning to gain a little bit of speed. We're working, so my mom is one of 10 kids born in Ireland. I'm sure you're very surprised to hear this. She didn't speak English till she was 5, so she's from what we call the Gaeltacht. And there is an economic, like a chamber corollary for the Irish language called Oberoi and the Gaeltacht. And my cousin Ronan, who lives in Carrow, which is just west of Galway, is one of the leaders of that. So he and I have been in contact and trying to, how can we assimilate and how can we bring that presence here? So look for some Irish street signs at our spots within the next year or two. Yes, Charlie.
Not that I'm looking to be the one that always asks provocative.
Go for it.
I was at a conference the other day, and there was a keynote from a woman named Elena Joy. It was just incredible. She was a Mormon who went through conversion therapy. And she was talking about Gen Z and how 33% of them identify as non-heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
You're both working with kids in the arts.
Yes.
So I'm just curious how you're approaching this or where that is as a priority.
I mean,
I have lots to say about that, but it's your show. But no, I work with 7th through 12th graders through South Shore Children's Chorus. In my group of 60, about 33% of them do identify as not heterosexual, and I think what I'm seeing in young people, what I'm seeing in Gen Z, is it's actually less about identifying as something,
right.
and more about identifying as themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's actually one of the most beautiful things in the entire planet. But I tend to be quite grandiose. But it's really lovely to see, and to see them respect each other, and to see them look at the world and to say, okay, world, you don't get to put me in a box.
Right.
I get to create my own box. I get to create and bust through any ceiling. There is no ceiling. I'm outside. And because of that, what we're seeing, I also think that this is tied, and I have absolutely 0% of expertise in this. This is just what I think. I do think it's tied to mental health and the mental health crisis in teens and in Gen Z. They know so much more about anxiety and depression and tools to manage that, which older generations, I'm a millennial, I'm like the millennial, right? I part my hair on the side and I read Harry Potter. Like, I love millennial things. And one of the things, then. Yeah, okay, great. Welcome.
I just lost 20 years.
But I think we as older generations didn't have those tools, and now we're looking at them and they're like, oh, like I'm gonna stand up for myself in this moment because I need to take 5 breaths. And I'm like, when I was 16 years old, I would have never looked at an adult and said, excuse me, I'm gonna leave the room right now because I need to take 5 breaths. It just would not have been something that would have even crossed my mind, right? But I think these things are tied together because they are so looking inward and saying, I'm going to create the person that I want to be on the inside and the outside, and I'm going to approach the world as who I am from the inside, and then whatever comes of that, I will be more confident. So I actually think we're going to see a lot more confidence from Gen Z than we have seen, because that's how they're bouncing back. They're really looking internally. They have a lot of access to things like therapy, to things like mental health. I know that in the past 5 years, I've done my own research and I've done my own certifications in mental health and in how to work with social emotional learning and all of these kinds of things, where I'm now teaching these strategies that I would have never used in a million years, right? And I'm showing these students these strategies, and they become mirrors and they reflect that right back at you. And it's really beautiful. And I think I'm really interested to see how it grows and to see actually Gen Z raise children. And what is that going to look like?
Right.
What is that going to look like in the future when we have these confident human beings who are saying, this is me unapologetically, and it's okay if you don't like me. There's a lot of that too. It's okay if you don't like me, but this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be, and you do need to respect me, but you don't have to like my choices. And then seeing them raise children, I think, is going to really create some interesting motion, especially in ADEI, where people are saying, this is what I love, this is who I love, and this is how I'm going to create my world and my family.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of that, and we're experiencing it as parents, even with our, it's so fascinating. So we have a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, and the 20-year-old is sort of at the onset of it. And he, sort of like, everyone's beginning to identify as they, them, and it's, he didn't have a problem with it, but he was just kind of confused because it was burgeoning. And my younger one came through and he was talking about this friend, and I thought he was talking about plural friends because, I'm still stuck in the more traditional grammar, and he's like, oh, and they are something, and I said, wait, circle back, and I said, so and so identifies as they, them. He goes, yeah, but it's so fluid for them, and so here, our solution has been, we introduce ourselves and we say, I'm Patrice Maye, I identify using the pronouns she, her, hers. We started doing that with our teen program, which has been titled Inspired I, and sort of so during the pandemic year, we couldn't all meet. We typically do collaborative murals, and you'll see one on the sort of side of the building, and in the back of our building, there's all collaborative murals that have been completed by our teen group. But we made them do a series of self-portraits because they couldn't collaborate. And so we made them look inward. And part of that inward journey was about that. And then for our middle school students, we have one that's called Me, Myself, and I. So that it's, again, we're stealing from De La Soul. I'm stealing lyrics from songs. But that one is very specific about that inward journey. It's, and they're at that age, the middle school students particularly, they're like, that's when they start identifying with sexuality or just becoming non-binary or stating that they are, stating, I am myself. And so we have worked with the Citrus Public Schools to create it as part of the wellness curriculum. Because that is and we tied it with a whole other thing where we are all superheroes, where what makes you different is what makes you special. And that's, it's not exactly the same because that's more of a broad brush than the, how people are identifying, but it's linked to that.
We're doing a similar program with the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office this summer called Find Your Voice, which is actually not a choral-based program. It's finding your voice through the arts. Just creative mind, just right there. But it's the same thing. So they'll be doing journaling and having a cultivated conversation around who am I, what is my identity, and then creating performance art projects through that lens. So I think that there's a lot of good that can come from that. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but it was just
well-based question.
Yeah, that's good though. It's a good question.
I don't have a question, but I just feel like that is such an interesting topic to touch because I feel like art is like that middle space where mental health is like conjunctive with everybody. Like the newer generation especially, that's like an outlet for their emotions.
Right.
So I feel like art is just gonna be such an upcoming thing in the newer generations, and that just makes me so happy.
Oh, yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jill.
I found this time fascinating, and for those in the room who share your vision of opening the doors for the arts on the South Shore, when we go back to our homes or our offices, how can we help? What can we do?
Oh, it's like great. I mean, you just check out our website, which, yes, admittedly, it is what it is, but the new one's coming. But we do all of our programming is there. Like it's, think about, obviously, I mean, you're a development director. I'm going to say the money, right? Because that's one way. If you have, if you can financially support us, awesome. If you can't and you want to volunteer, that is another way. There's a huge way. Take classes. Send young people our way. If there's so many different ways to be involved, just email me or call me and talk about how you want to be involved, because I will make it personal for you. Because it's only going to be sustainable if it is personal for you, and you have to have a connection to it, and then it's authentic, and then we can work together and make something really beautiful.
Just to add on to that, I think visibility is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that the chamber has done for me, which is really, really great, is basically my whole life I only know music teachers. That's like my friend group. That's the only people I know. So I was like, what should I do in order to grow my business? How about I show up at this after hours thing and talk to people who don't do the thing? And that became a skill for me, because I was like, what do I even talk to you about? I don't even, do you like singing? That's the only thing I know to talk about. So I learned how to talk about things that aren't singing. But it's really, really helpful, and I was just talking to Patrice about this. I know for my business, I'm in a spot where I want people to know that we even exist, right? And we're still in that stage. I founded it in 2016, so we're about at that 7-year mark. And so that's as easy as a social media share. That's as easy as, did you know that this thing is happening? Did you know we have a concert on Saturday, year-round, Milton High School, 1:30 p.m.? We've already sold 615 tickets, which is awesome. But, just helping people to realize that we are here and the work that we're doing, and anything that you can do to help get us out in front of the community is really, really helpful.
See, Liz on my staff is nodding, because she does all the social media here, and she's always like, Patrice, you're supposed to like things. I'm like, I know! And I don't think about it, so right now she's like, yay!
But yeah, I think engagement that way is always really helpful, especially because everyone in here has a different social circle, and most of them are people I don't know. And my organization was built on people I knew. And then that slowly webs out, right? So one click on a social media share, and that could really, really help for us.
Okay, awesome. All right. With that, maybe we can give one last round of applause to both of them.